When I arrived at the upscale restaurant for my daughter-in-law's birthday dinner, I discovered that the seat meant for me simply didn't exist. Everyone laughed as if it were just a harmless joke. But in that moment, I realized my kindness had become my greatest weakness. My name is Linda Harris. I'm 63 years old, and I live in Denver, Colorado. I used to believe that kindness was always repaid with respect. But I learned, in the most painful way, that when you're too kind, people start to look down on you. It all began 3 weeks before that fateful dinner, when my daughter-in-law, Rachel, called me. I was in the kitchen, making caramel pudding, my son Ethan's favorite since he was a boy. Rachel's voice sounded cheerful, but something in it gave me a bad feeling. She said she was turning 40 soon, and Ethan had suggested celebrating with a special dinner at the Golden Terrace, a new French restaurant downtown. Rachel spoke proudly, saying the dinner would be elegant, refined, and intimate, with only 10 guests. Herself, Ethan, her sister and brother-in-law, her boss from the real estate firm, and a few friends from their social circle. I sat quietly, waiting to hear my name, but it never came. Finally, I smiled faintly and asked, "What about me, Rachel? Am I invited too?" There was a long silence, so long I could hear her breathing. Then Rachel spoke, her voice soft in a way that felt fake. "Oh." Ethan thought maybe this time we could do something a little more sophisticated. The Golden Terrace is a very high-end place. You know, your style is more simple, down to earth, and we just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable around that kind of crowd. I froze. Simple, down to earth, not a good fit. Those words cut through me like knives. My own daughter-in-law was implying that I wasn't classy enough to sit at the same table. I asked again, "And what did Ethan think?" She replied quickly, "Actually, it was his idea. He just didn't want you to feel awkward, since everyone there will be professionals, talking about art, wine, European travel." The boy I had raised with every ounce of my youth, every dollar I earned from sewing, was now ashamed of having a mother like me. Rachel tried to soften it by saying, "Maybe to make it up, you could have lunch with us next Sunday someplace a little more fitting for you." I simply replied, "That won't be necessary. Thank you." I hung up, my heart cold as stone. Sitting in the kitchen, I stared at the caramel cooling in the pan, the same dessert Ethan used to beg for every birthday. And in that quiet moment, I understood. Being able to cook something delicious at home no longer made me worthy in their world. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rachel's words kept echoing in my mind, filled with pity and contempt. In the days that followed, I began to notice the things I had ignored for years. Ethan always changed the subject when I gave advice. Rachel smiled politely when I spoke, then immediately looked down at her phone. They spoke to me with that gentle tone people use for a child. I remembered other moments like Rachel's tea party, where I was the only one who didn't understand the conversation about Italian-made baby strollers, or a friend's anniversary dinner, where everyone discussed investments and stocks while I sat quietly, forcing a polite smile. I realized I had become an obligation in my own family, not a mother, just a tolerated presence, as long as I didn't ruin the perfect image they tried to maintain. What hurt most was this. A lifetime of sacrifice had been dismissed as insignificant. I had worked for 40 years, raised my son, gave him the chance to go to college, to build a career. And yet now, I wasn't classy enough to sit at the same table with my own child. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 63-year-old woman with neatly cut silver hair and calloused hands. Was it this simplicity that made my son ashamed of me? In the weeks that followed, a quiet fire burned inside me. Not just because of that dinner, but because of all the years I had been dismissed, overlooked, and pushed aside. I had tried so hard to be the easygoing mother, the reasonable mother-in-law, until I completely disappeared within my own family. And worse, I had become a source of shame in their eyes. Kindness, the very thing I once took pride in, had become the reason they stopped respecting me. But then, something inside me awakened, a strength I thought I had lost long ago. And soon, they would learn that underestimating a 63-year-old woman from Texas was the most expensive mistake of their lives. I walked through my quiet house, looking at the photos on the shelf, feeling like I was watching the life of a stranger. In one photo, Ethan was 5, grinning beside the birthday cake I made with my own hands. In another, at 16, he was hugging me on his high school graduation day when he was still proud of the mother who sewed tirelessly so he could get a good education. When did that sweet, affectionate boy turn into a man embarrassed by his own mother's existence? During those dark days, I began questioning everything I had done as a mother. Had I spoiled him too much? Had my unconditional sacrifices made him forget gratitude? Or maybe, deep down, I had always known this day would come. I just didn't want to see it. I remembered the first time Ethan brought Rachel, the woman who would become his wife, to my home 8 years ago. Rachel wore a designer dress that cost about 2 months of my pension, and a strong, expensive perfume that lingered in my small house for days. From the very first look, I noticed she wasn't gazing around with contempt, but with a cold curiosity, as if she were touring a museum of the working class. Back then, I still believed love could erase all social boundaries. I prepared a special lunch, laid out my best tablecloth, and placed a few flowers from my garden in a clear glass vase. Rachel complimented everything politely, but beneath her words, I sensed pity mixed with disdain. She asked about my work as if she truly cared. I told her proudly that I'd been a seamstress for nearly 40 years, from sewing clothes for neighbors to having regular clients in the community. I said every dollar I saved went toward Ethan's college tuition, and that every sacrifice had been worth it when I saw him succeed. But I noticed Rachel and Ethan exchanging glances every time I mentioned my modest life, silent looks. That said more than words, as if they spoke a private language I couldn't understand, though. I knew the subject was me. After that lunch, Ethan visited less often. When he did, he was always in a hurry, saying he had work or some important meeting. Our conversations grew shorter, more superficial. He asked about my health, complimented my cooking, talked about the weather, but never opened up the way he used to. And I, in my naive, motherly way, thought he was just busy. I had no idea that, in his mind, I had already been filed under someone to check on occasionally, a responsibility to be managed. Their wedding was the first clear sign that I had lost my place in my son's life. The ceremony was held at an exclusive country club outside Denver that I'd never even heard of. Rachel planned every detail meticulously, from imported flowers to a French menu I couldn't pronounce. The dress I wore became the subject of 3 separate polite suggestions from Rachel. She said I should pick something a little more elegant, then took me to a luxury boutique where the saleswoman looked me up and down as if I were a worn-out relic. That dress cost nearly half of my retirement savings, but I paid for it because I thought that's what a mother was supposed to do. I was introduced briefly, while Rachel's parents were the stars of the evening. Her father, a well-known attorney. Her mother, a retired professor who spoke with charm and moved easily among the city's elite. I sat at a side table, forcing smiles at conversations I didn't understand, pretending to enjoy dishes I didn't even know how to pronounce. Their honeymoon lasted nearly a month in Europe. Ethan sent me a few postcards from Paris, Rome, and Barcelona, places I had only ever seen on TV. When they returned, bringing expensive gifts and talking about Michelin-starred restaurants, museums, and fine wines, all I could do was pour coffee into an old cup and serve a few homemade cookies. The things that once felt warm and familiar suddenly seemed laughably ordinary in their new world. I realized they had crossed into a world where I no longer belonged. The years that followed, were a slow drift apart. Each visit felt colder than the one before. Every word, every hug, carried the weight of obligation. I became the mother-in-law to visit once in a while, the birthday call not to forget, the person who couldn't be abandoned but was never truly loved. And through all those years of being quietly pushed aside, I still tried to be the good mother, the gentle, grateful mother-in-law who appreciated even the smallest act of kindness. I had shrunk myself down so much that I had nearly disappeared from their lives. But that week after the phone call about the birthday dinner, another fire began to rise in me. A fire of anger, dignity, and awakening. I walked through my house, looking at every corner that my late husband, Richard, and I had built together with love and hard work. Every object, every photograph told the story of an honest life. It was this modest home that had raised a successful man. These calloused hands had stitched every shirt, every seam to pay for his education. This heart had sacrificed everything so my son could have the opportunities I never did. And now all of that was considered not suitable for a fancy dinner. That morning, the day of Rachel's birthday, the sky was gray and cold, as if reflecting my own mood. I woke up at 5 a.m., not out of habit, but because of a deep, gnawing unease. I lay staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Richard and I had shared for 42 years, trying to gather my thoughts and face the decision I had made the night before. After 2 weeks of torment, following that humiliating conversation with Rachel, after feeling like a beggar for affection in my own son's life, I decided I would no longer accept scraps of love. If they thought I didn't deserve a seat at that table, then I would show them exactly who the woman they underestimated truly was. I stood up slowly, feeling my knees crack, and opened the wardrobe. In the far corner, carefully wrapped in a yellowed plastic bag, was the elegant black dress I had bought for Ethan's wedding, the one that hid the marks of age, the one I'd never worn again. Today would be different. I spent the whole morning getting ready, something I hadn't done in years. I rolled my hair with old curlers from the drawer, applied a touch of red lipstick, the shade I hadn't used since Richard's funeral. I sprayed a little of the expensive perfume Ethan had given me last Christmas, the one I'd saved for a special occasion. And today, I knew, was that occasion. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman. No longer the patient mother-in-law who smiled to hide her pain, but a woman ready to reclaim her dignity even if it meant making her son bow his head in shame. The Golden Terrace restaurant sat in downtown Denver, inside a beautifully restored historic building. I had passed by it before, but never stepped inside because places like that weren't meant for people like me. But that evening, I knew I would walk through its doors to see how it felt to be treated like an outsider in my own son's world. I arrived at the restaurant at 8:15 p.m., 15 minutes late. Deliberately so. I wanted everyone already seated, laughter echoing around the table, so my arrival would bring everything to a halt. The doorman looked me up and down with that polite, condescending air of someone accustomed to looking down on others. He asked if I had a reservation, if I was lost, or if I needed assistance. I answered firmly, my voice steady. I'm here to find my family. My son, Ethan Harris, is dining here. I just want to say hello. His expression turned skeptical. Clearly, he didn't believe that a woman like me could have a son dining in such an exclusive place. But finally, he gave a reluctant nod and let me in. Inside was even more breathtaking than I had imagined. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceiling. White tablecloths covered tables spaced far apart. Soft voices floated over thick Persian carpets. Every detail radiated luxury and exclusivity. I walked slowly through the dining room, feeling the curious glances of the guests until I saw them. Ethan sat at the center of a large round table, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, looked stunning in a shimmering metallic dress probably worth half a year of my pension. Around them were elegant couples, laughing and chatting, glasses of wine glimmering under the lights, dishes served by waiters in perfectly pressed uniforms. They looked so happy, so perfect, and clearly they didn't need me. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. When I was only a few steps away from the table, Ethan saw me. His face froze in shock, as if he had just seen a ghost appear in the middle of his perfect dinner. Rachel turned, and all the color drained from her face. The laughter stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. The air in the room thickened, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out. I smiled gently, my voice calm and soft. "Happy birthday, Rachel. So, where's my seat at the table?" The question came out with deliberate innocence, as if I truly believed there was a seat waiting for me. And that was when the most humiliating moment of my life began. Ethan looked around, panicking, like he was searching for an escape from a disaster. Rachel forced a smile and murmured, "We didn't know you'd be coming." The other guests glanced at each other, realizing they were witnessing a family tragedy unfold right before their eyes. Then one man, one of Rachel's friends, the kind who looked like he had never worked a day in his life, let out a dry chuckle and said, "Well, at least now everyone's got something interesting to talk about after dinner." Soft laughter followed, mixed with entertained stares. They were laughing at me as if I were just another act in their evening's entertainment. And in that moment, something inside me shattered completely. This wasn't about whether or not there was a chair for me at the table. I looked straight at Ethan, the son I had loved, protected, and raised with everything I had. And in his eyes, I saw something that hurt more than any insult ever could. Shame. He was ashamed of me. Right then, I made a decision that would change everything. I smiled politely at the table full of refined people who saw me as an intruder, wished them a pleasant evening, and turned to leave. But before I walked out, I spoke loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I'm so glad to see my son has grown up and become the kind of man who can laugh at his own mother in public." Ethan stared at me, speechless. Rachel looked down, while the others pretended to look away. I nodded politely, then walked away with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Behind me, I could sense the collective sigh of relief. They thought the awkward scene was finally over. But when I reached the door, I stopped. I pulled out my phone. There was a call I needed to make, one that would change the entire night. I dialed a number I had memorized months ago, ever since light had returned to a life I thought would stay dim forever. On the other end, a warm male voice answered immediately. It was Henry Collins, my boyfriend. For the past 4 months, the man who had made me believe that love can find you at any time, at any age. I told him everything, the humiliation, the laughter, the look of shame on my son's face. His tone changed instantly, firm, restrained, but full of anger. "I'm coming. No one, absolutely no one, gets to treat the woman I love that way." What my family didn't know was that Henry Collins was the owner of the Golden Terrace. 5 minutes later, I saw a handsome, silver-haired man walk into the restaurant wearing a look I had never seen on him before. The gentle, warm Henry the First knew was gone, replaced by a confident, powerful businessman radiating authority. He walked over, gently kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Are you okay?" Then he turned and walked straight into the main dining hall. I watched him, my heart pounding, as Henry made his way toward the table where Ethan and Rachel were pretending everything was fine. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion scene in a movie. Henry introduced himself polite, but firm. "I'm the owner of this restaurant. I was just informed about an incident involving a guest who is very important to me. I'm afraid this table will no longer be served tonight." I saw Ethan's face turn ghostly white, Rachel's complexion pale like paper. and the others at the table frozen in confusion. Unsure of what was happening, Henry signaled to the staff. Immediately, the waiters stopped serving, and the manager approached the table, speaking in a calm, yet commanding tone. Apologies, everyone. Due to internal management reasons, the restaurant can no longer serve this table. We appreciate your understanding. The room fell into absolute silence. Everyone in the restaurant turned to watch, stunned, as a group of well-dressed diners was being asked to leave the most exclusive restaurant in Denver. Ethan tried to explain. Rachel forced a polite smile to recover her composure, but Henry didn't yield. He remained courteous, yet unshakably firm, cold as steel. One by one, the 10 people at that table stood up awkwardly, gathering their handbags and coats, and quietly walked out under the curious gazes of the other guests. As they passed by me, Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion, shame, and fear. Fear of who I really was. Fear of what else he didn't know about me. Rachel couldn't even lift her head. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being humiliated. I was the one watching others face the consequences of their own cruelty. Standing beside Henry, feeling his hand rest gently on my back, I knew with absolute certainty, from this moment on, no one will ever make me feel small again. The days that followed were a storm of emotions unlike anything I had ever felt. For decades, I had been the weaker one, always accommodating, always silent, just to keep the peace. But that night, for the first time in my life, I was the strongest person in the room. The feeling was both liberating and terrifying. That night, Henry stayed with me. He held my hand as I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. It felt as if a massive weight had been lifted off my chest, and for the first time, I could breathe freely without feeling like a burden to anyone. Later, Henry told me that in all his years running the restaurant, he had never witnessed something so cruel. He had seen every kind of customer and every kind of behavior, but never a son publicly humiliating his own mother. He added that if he hadn't stepped in that night, he wouldn't have been able to look at himself in the mirror again. In the days following the incident at the Golden Terrace, my phone remained completely silent. No calls from Ethan, no messages from Rachel. I knew they needed time not to feel remorse, but to process the shock of realizing that the unsophisticated mother they had once looked down on was now someone they couldn't control. I knew they would eventually reach out, not out of love or guilt, but out of curiosity about who I truly was and what else I might be hiding. The first call came the following Monday. Ethan's voice was different, less confident, less arrogant, sounding like someone trying hard to stay composed. For the first time in years, he spoke to me with a hint of respect, not out of affection, but out of necessity. He said he needed to see me urgently, that there were important things to clarify, and that the whole dinner must have been a misunderstanding. I could hear the fake humility in his voice. I calmly replied, "I'm busy this week. If you want to talk, I'll have time on Saturday." The silence that followed said it all. Ethan wasn't used to others, especially his mother, setting the schedule for him. But eventually, he agreed. All that week, I thought about the meeting ahead. Part of me felt a quiet satisfaction, imagining Ethan fumbling to adjust to this new mother. But another part, the mother still inside me, felt nothing but sorrow. Henry advised me to let my son speak first, to listen to everything before deciding what to do. He had lost his mother when he was young, and often told me, "Family is a treasure, but it's only worth keeping if it's built on respect." I remembered his words. On Saturday morning, I cleaned the house more carefully than usual. Not out of nervousness, but because I wanted Ethan to see that I was no longer the weak woman afraid of being abandoned. I placed a vase of fresh flowers in the living room, brewed coffee with my finest porcelain set, and put on the new blue dress I had just bought. When Ethan arrived, I could tell he had also prepared himself neatly dressed, holding an expensive bouquet. His face caught somewhere between anxiety and fear. He greeted me more politely than usual, complimented how young I looked, praised how clean the house was, spoke softly, but it all felt forced, mechanical. We sat in the living room, the same place that had witnessed so many memories between mother and son. Ethan stayed silent for a few minutes, then finally spoke, his voice noticeably lower. Rachel and I have thought a lot about that night. Maybe we've been a little inconsiderate toward you at times. The word inconsiderate hit my mind like a stone dropping into still water. After years of being dismissed, excluded, humiliated, all of it reduced to two simple words? As if it were just a minor misunderstanding, not a cruel pattern that had gone on for years. Ethan went on, saying they had no idea I had any connection to the owner of the Golden Terrace, that they were surprised to learn I had my own life, my own friends, that maybe they had underestimated me. The way he said the word refined told me everything he hadn't learned a thing. He still saw the world through the lens of status and appearance. To him, I was still the simple mother. Only now, he had to be more careful around me. I asked directly, my voice calm. Are you here to apologize sincerely? Or because you're afraid of losing face? Ethan froze. He tried to piece together a few sentences about honor and misunderstandings, then admitted that some people in his finance circle had been talking about what happened at the restaurant, that his reputation could suffer. So, it was clear. He hadn't come out of love, but out of self-interest. The mother he once felt ashamed of had now become a threat to his career. I smiled softly and said, I understand now. I finally see how our relationship really works. Then I continued, slowly but firmly. You only come to me when you need something, and you stay away when I make you uncomfortable. For years, I accepted that because I thought I didn't deserve more. But that's changed now. Ethan swallowed hard, realizing I had seen right through him. He tried to justify himself, saying he still loved me, that he just wanted to start over. I nodded. I want to start over too, but in a different way. A relationship based on respect, where I'm not just tolerated but valued, where my voice is heard, not dismissed. Ethan nodded repeatedly, promising he would change. But I saw it in his eyes still. Calculation, not understanding. When he left the house that day, I knew he believed everything would soon go back to normal. That I would once again be the gentle, forgiving mother who forgot everything just to keep the peace. But Ethan didn't realize the old mother he knew had died the night at the Golden Terrace. The woman who remained would never be controlled again. In the days that followed, my family suddenly became unusually attentive. There were constant calls to check in, invitations to lunch, and exaggerated concern about my health and mood. They suddenly remembered I existed, and that my existence now made them uneasy. I knew the truth. Their concern didn't come from love, it came from fear. Fear that I still had secrets they didn't know. Fear that I could embarrass them again. And perhaps they were right to be afraid. The weeks that followed brought a transformation I never thought I'd experience at 63. The sudden attention from my son and daughter-in-law, something that once would have made me overjoyed, now brought a strange mix of satisfaction and bitterness. It was nice, of course, to see Ethan calling me 3 times a week, Rachel inviting me to lunch at fancy restaurants, and expensive just because gifts showing up at my door. But everything felt fake, as if every gesture had been carefully calculated. During one of our overly polite phone calls, Ethan hinted that he wanted to meet Henry. He said he was very impressed by Henry's demeanor and that it would be interesting to get to know successful businessmen like him. The way he said it told me everything. He didn't see Henry, the man who made his mother happy. He only saw Henry a potential connection that could benefit his career. I replied calmly, my tone steady but firm. Henry is a private man. He prefers to keep his personal life separate from family matters. I heard Ethan's voice drop with disappointment. He wasn't used to me saying no, and now he no longer had control over me. That was the moment I realized my true power. For years, I had begged for attention, accepted any kind of treatment, as long as I could stay close to my son. But now, I was the one setting the boundaries, the one deciding the terms for every meeting. Henry watched me handle my perfect family with a mix of pride and concern. He had lost his mother at a young age, so he deeply valued family bonds, but he also understood something clearly: what was happening wasn't genuine reconciliation. It was a performance born out of fear. One afternoon, as we sat together drinking coffee on the porch, Henry turned to me and asked, "Are you truly happy?" The question caught me off guard. I had never really thought about it seriously. I told him that being treated with respect felt relieving, but it also hurt, because I knew that respect came from fear, not love. Ethan had only changed his behavior once he realized I could hurt his reputation, not because he understood what he had done to his mother. Henry gently squeezed my hand, his eyes warm but full of understanding. "You deserve to be loved genuinely, Linda, not to receive scraps of affection handed out of convenience. Age doesn't mean we have to tolerate toxic relationships, even with family." His words left me speechless. I realized I had spent my whole life starved for affection, convincing myself that an older widow no longer had the right to expect love or romance. But Henry had proven otherwise. He showed me that I was still a woman, capable of loving and being loved. That age hadn't made me invisible or less desirable. That I could still share, feel, and dream, even if those dreams were simple ones. But he also made me face a painful truth. I had wasted so many years searching for love from people who never intended to give it. In the midst of those thoughts, I suddenly received a call from Rachel. Her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from her, shaky, exhausted, and genuinely worried. She said she needed to see me, that there was something serious I needed to know. At first, I was suspicious, afraid this was just another trick to pull me back into the family drama I'd been trying so hard to escape. But there was something in her voice that told me this time it was real. We met the next day at a small coffee shop near my home in Denver. When I arrived, the woman waiting for me wasn't the polished, confident Rachel I once knew. She looked pale, without makeup, her eyes dark and sunken from sleepless nights. Rachel began to speak, her voice trembling. She had just discovered that Ethan had been having an affair for over a year. The other woman was nearly 20 years younger, single, ambitious, and neither of them had tried to hide it. Many people in their financial and social circles already knew. The news hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because I ever believed their marriage was perfect, but because it explained everything about Ethan's recent behavior. The restlessness, the guilt, the nervous energy whenever he looked at me, the way he suddenly became too busy every time I called. It turned out he hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had betrayed the very values I raised him with. Rachel said she discovered it by accident while looking through his phone for a contact number. The messages she found were undeniable words of love, travel plans, promises about the future, even intimate photos. She broke down in tears, saying she didn't know what to do. She wanted a divorce, but was terrified of losing money and social standing. She felt humiliated, alone, and completely lost. As I listened to Rachel, a storm of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me felt a cruel satisfaction the woman who once humiliated me was now falling apart. But another part, the mother and the woman in me, felt genuine pity. I asked her, "Why are you telling me this?" Why not confide in your wealthy friends or your family? Rachel lowered her head, her voice fading to a whisper. Because you're the only one who truly understands Ethan. I need advice from someone who has endured him. After what happened at the Golden Terrace, I realized you're far stronger and wiser than I ever imagined. I underestimated you, but now I know you're the kind of woman with the strength and experience I need. It was the first time Rachel ever treated me as an equal, a mature woman whose words carried real value. Ironically, it only happened when she needed me the most. I chose my words carefully before responding. I said it was sad that she had to go through this, but I wasn't surprised. I had already noticed the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior, clear signs that their marriage was cracking. Rachel looked at me, startled, and asked what I had noticed. I answered plainly, my tone calm but cold. A man who can betray his wife can also disrespect his own mother. A man who breaks his marriage vows can just as easily betray any family bond. The way Ethan treated me in that restaurant, that's the real man you're just now beginning to see. My words came out sharper than I intended, but they were true. Ethan had become the kind of man who could deeply hurt the women who loved him most. And now, Rachel was paying the price for choosing a husband with no integrity. She stayed silent for a long time, then quietly asked, "Do you think I should confront him now, or wait until I have more proof?" I told her the choice was hers, but if it were me, I would never let anyone betray and humiliate me and still walk away forgiven. I said she was still young, beautiful, and perfectly capable of starting over with someone who truly valued her, that living in a marriage built on lies was the same as betraying herself. When we parted that day, Rachel thanked me with a sincerity I had never seen in her before. She said, "Now I understand why Ethan always said his mother was strong, even when he treated you badly." On the way home, I reflected on the irony of life. The daughter-in-law who once saw me as an outdated old woman was now seeking my advice for her broken marriage. The one who once mocked my humiliation was now crying, begging me for comfort. But what touched me most was realizing that I had always been that strong, wise, and kind woman. It's just that no one had ever cared to see it before. A week after that conversation, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Ethan, but his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Politeness. It was the voice of a desperate man. He said Rachel had confronted him about the affair and that everything was falling apart. She had hired a lawyer and threatened to tell her parents, and her family had powerful connections in the city's legal world. If the scandal came out, Ethan's career would be destroyed. For the first time in years, my son called me because he truly needed me. But ironically, it was the moment I least wanted to save him. I asked bluntly, my voice devoid of emotion, "Why should I help you? The mother you once said was not classy enough to sit at your table now. She's the one who's supposed to fix your mess?" The question left him speechless. He still expected me to automatically slip back into the role of the protective, comforting mother. Ethan began to plead, saying he was sorry, that he realized his mistakes, that he needed his mother's wisdom to find a way out. But I could hear it clearly in his voice. He wasn't sorry for hurting me, only for getting caught. I calmly said, "Rachel came to me first. She's part of this family too. And now, I choose to stand with the one who has treated me with respect." On the other end of the line, there was a long, heavy silence. At last, Ethan understood that his actions had real consequences and that I was no longer the obedient mother he could control. In the days that followed, everything blew up. Rachel officially filed for divorce and, following my advice, didn't bother to preserve any fake sense of dignity. She spoke the truth openly, including every detail of the affair that shattered Ethan's reputation. The worst part was that Ethan's mistress happened to be the daughter of a major client at his firm. When her father found out, Ethan was fired immediately. Within just a few weeks, he lost his job, his wife, his house, and his name. I kept my distance, watching it all unfold without interfering. I was there to support Rachel emotionally when she needed me, but I never involved myself in the legal process, and I made no effort to reconcile them. For the first time in my life, I let Ethan face the consequences of his own actions, with no mother's hand left to shield him. Henry watched how I handled everything with admiration in his eyes. He said I had found the perfect balance between compassion and firmness, helping others without enabling their wrongs. Rachel's transformation also surprised me. Freed from a toxic marriage, she became stronger, more independent, and wiser. She landed a better job at a real estate firm in Denver, moved into an elegant apartment she paid for herself, and each time we met, the respect in her eyes grew deeper. One Sunday afternoon, 2 months after the divorce proceedings began, Rachel appeared at my doorstep. Her face was a mix of worry and determination. She said she wanted to ask me for something but would completely understand if I refused. Rachel was hosting a party for herself, a celebration of her new beginning as an independent woman, and she wanted me to be her guest of honor. She said that throughout her crisis, I had been the only one to offer honest advice without judgment, that she truly admired me and wanted to express her gratitude publicly. We both recognized the irony of it only a few months earlier. She thought I wasn't elegant enough to attend her birthday dinner, and now she wanted me to be the centerpiece of her rebirth. I agreed, but with one condition. I would go with Henry. Rachel smiled sincerely, said she was looking forward to meeting him, and revealed that the party would be held at none other than the Golden Terrace, the place where everything had begun. The celebration took place on a Thursday evening. When I walked into the restaurant, my arm linked with Henry's, I felt like a completely different woman from the one who had once been humiliated. There. The room shimmered with fresh flowers, warm candlelight, and the soft sound of jazz. Rachel had invited around 20 guests, colleagues, a few close friends she'd made since the divorce, and several relatives who had supported her through the hard times. It was a small gathering, but far more genuine and heartfelt than any of her previous glamorous parties. During dinner, Rachel stood up to give an emotional speech. She spoke about rebirth, the strength of women, and the importance of recognizing who truly stands by you when life falls apart. When she mentioned my name as a symbol of courage and wisdom, everyone in the room rose to their feet and applauded. And right at that moment, Ethan walked in. He entered the restaurant alone, uninvited, his face twisted between anger and despair. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken. He looked like a man completely beaten by life. Ethan walked straight to the table and asked to speak with me in private. He said he wanted forgiveness, that he had realized his mistakes, and that he wanted to repair our relationship as mother and son. But when I looked deep into his eyes, all I saw was fear, not genuine remorse. I spoke slowly, gently, but firmly. You will always be my son, and I will always love you. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Before we can start over, you need to learn to take responsibility for your own choices. Ethan tried to argue, saying I was being too cold, that a mother should love her child unconditionally. At that moment, Henry stood up, his voice calm but resolute. I think it's best if you leave before the restaurant has to ask you to. Ethan froze, realizing he couldn't change what was happening. He walked away but didn't forget to throw me one last bitter glance, proof that he still hadn't learned anything about respect or accountability. When the party ended, Rachel hugged me tightly, her tears soaking my shoulder. Through her trembling voice, she said, "Now I understand what it means to be a strong woman. I just hope that one day I can have even half your wisdom." On the way home, Henry held my hand, his eyes filled with pride. He said that the timid, fragile woman he met months ago had become a source of strength not only for herself, but for others. That night, I realized something profound. Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you create by setting clear boundaries for how others are allowed to treat you. Kindness without dignity is weakness, but kindness with limits that is true strength. Ethan still tries to reach out from time to time, but always when he needs something. And each time, I give him the same answer. I can only talk to you when I see real change, not empty promises. My name is Linda Harris, and I've finally learned this truth. It is never too late to stop accepting scraps of affection. A real family must be built on a foundation of respect, not obligation or emotional bargaining. And sometimes, to teach others to value you, you must have the courage to live without them. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real experiences, with names and locations changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Linda wasn't perfect, she stayed silent for too long, until she finally chose to speak up and protect her self-worth. Perhaps we've all been there, torn between silence for love and the courage to speak for ourselves. Which would you choose? The answer isn't easy. But Linda proved that even with a broken heart, faith and dignity can still light the way forward. She believed that God never abandons honest souls, that every wound, once placed in His hands, can become a blessing. If you connected with Linda's story, stay until the end of the video where 2 more stories await. Ones I believe you'll love and perhaps see yourself reflected in.